7. We discussed the other Friday. On man, heaven's influence works not so, but that it first imprints the air. So soul into the soul may flow, though it to body first prepare. In other words, souls can flow into each other, but to do so, they have to first go back down into the bodies. In other words, this is, the narrator, the person who kind of sees this thing, saying that this can happen, but these two ecstatic souls, or these two souls that are in an ecstatic experience at this point, in order for them to flow into each other, okay, they first have to go down into the bodies. As our blood labors to beget spirits, as like souls as it can, and what Dunn is doing there is he's playing on the medieval Renaissance notion of the humors, or as the Brits would spell it, humors, which are these immaterial essences in the body. There are 4 of them, minimum 4 of them, that determine the kind of person you are. Okay? Bile and choleric and depressive and all this kind of stuff depends on which of the humors is more heavily mixed in you. For example, if you have a lot of bile in you, you're going to be kind of angry and hot-headed. Okay? And then there are several others. Just an example. So the blood labors to beget spirits. That's what these are. Okay? As, lost my place, as like souls it can. Okay? The blood is trying to do this. Blood's physical, right? It's trying to reproduce or give something just like the souls do. Because such fingers need to knit, as souls do. How? Souls knit souls. But in order to do that, knit, make, create. In order to do that, what must they first do? Go back to the previous slides. They first have to descend into the bodies. Because such fingers need to knit that subtle knot which makes us man. And to me, that's one of the most brilliant lines in all of Donne's poetry. The subtle knot that makes us man. Notice, what are the fingers that do the knitting? It's not one or the other. It's not soul or blood. It's both of them. Because what's the subtle knot? What does the word subtle mean? I've been told I'm not very subtle. I'm pretty much out there and direct. Okay? Subtle means, nuanced. You kind of, if you're talking about speech, you're kind of guarded in your speech. You're kind of circumspect. You look at range of emotions, range of colors and such. I'm pretty much a black and white kind of a person and thinker and such. Okay? The subtle knot, what's the knot? A knot is where you take two things that are separate, right? And you tie them together. Okay? What's tied together in this? Flesh and spirit. They're knotted. Okay? We're going to skip the Holy Sonnets, but turn for just a moment to I shouldn't have said that because it may not be in here. Yes, line 11, page 938, what they give as sonnet 14. This is one of the most famous of the holy sonnets, Batter My Heart, Three-Person God. I think I've told you, I did my dissertation, I edited the holy sonnets. This is one of the few sonnets, shows almost no variation at all in terms of words. A lot of the other ones, you got various, what are called variants, not only different spellings, but different words. In a couple of them, you have entirely different lines. This one, it's like, it was never changed. Dunn wrote it and was immediately happy. Line 11, divorce me, untie, or break that knot again. Now, that knot is referring to the knot of marriage, but it's not talking about marriage to a person. It's talking about marriage to God. Okay? Here, that subtle knot which makes us man is the joining of flesh and spirit. C.S. Lewis refers to humanity as being amphibians. We live in two different realms, down here on earth and up there in, spiritual stuff. Okay? Notice, what's the problem with that kind of, let's take that back. It's not a problem. What does that kind of imagery imply? How tightly tied is that knot? Or can you merely pull on a thread and untie it? Because what happens if it's untied? Body, soul. Corpse, soul. So, because such fingers need to knit that subtle knot which make us man, so must pure lovers' souls descend to affections, and to faculties. We're going to get to the next two lines in a minute. So, go back to 61. As our blood labors to beget, we have the introduction of a simile. As, okay? So, now we get the conclusion of the simile. So, as our blood labors to beget spirits, as like souls it can, so must pure lovers' souls. They're out here, they're in this ecstatic union, so they must do what? Descend to affections, physical sensations, and to faculties. Means of understanding, okay? Which sense may, I love this line, reach and apprehend. Reach and take hold of. Else a great prince in prison lies. What's the great prince? And what's the prison? The great prince is the soul. The prison, the body. But only if the soul can never connect with another soul. And we could jump from there to mid-20th century poetry. Donne was real popular, beginning in around 1920 and up through most of the 20th century. Why? Existentialists loved Donne's poetry because they heard kind of a familiar voice with Donne. This line really gets at the existential idea, okay, that none of us can really know somebody else. We all walk around in our own little boxes, okay? And we look here, there's a wall, and here there's a wall, and here there's a wall, and here there's a wall, and there's a floor, and there's a ceiling. And try as we will, we can never completely break out of those boxes. So, Lover souls have got to descend to the bodies. Why? So that the bodies can reach and touch and apprehend. And if they don't, the speaker is saying, if you never really fully connect with somebody else, you're in prison. The you that is in the body is in prison. To our bodies turn we then. Now, bear in mind, who is saying this? His soul, her soul. The person whose mind has been so refined by love is overhearing all this conversation. Let's go back down to our bodies. Why? That so weak men on love revealed may look. Who are the weak men? Everybody who doesn't have a love like ours. In other words, the laity that are referred to in a valediction forbidding mourning, the people who invoke us in the canonization, who seek a pattern for love, okay? Love's mysteries in souls do grow. Mysteries. We've talked about that word. Things that cannot be explained. All right? Those grow in souls. But yet the body is his book. Book. And notice his book. What's the his referred to? Loves. Okay? What's the difference between souls and books? Like this one. See, I can open this book to any page and read it. I can't open Livy's soul. I can know her for 1,000 years. Like, know my wife for 38, nearly 39 years. I could know her for another 38 or 39 years, and I wouldn't know her like I could know one of these poems. Why? Because it's all here in black and white. It's all ready to be read and understood. Love's mysteries, we're told, in souls grow, but the body is his book. Books are to be read, analyzed. And if some lover, such as we, why? Because both meant the same, have heard this dialogue of one. So they're up here talking, and they're saying, and if by chance some lover, wink, wink, the guy over there, whose soul has been refined by love, if he's heard this, notice, dialogue of one. What kind of phrase is that? It's an oxymoron, right? Dialogue of one? No, then it should be a monologue. But it's not a monologue because there are two people, but they're both saying the exact same thing. Let him still mark us. Note, pay attention, that's all what mark means. He shall see small change when we're two bodies gone. He will not, okay, small change, that's probably that old English notion of litotes. That's understatement. Or, exaggerated overstatement. He'll see what? No change. This person who's been refined by love, when he sees our souls go back down into our bodies and how we interact, he's going to see what? Perfect love between these two. Okay? Or this one, because the souls have inanimated and such. Turn from there. Now, obviously, we're not doing, all of Donne, just as we didn't do all of Shakespeare or all of Johnson. But if you want a good kind of understanding of Donne, read one or two of his elegies. They're not like the Old English elegies, okay? Number 19, just, off side note, to his mistress going to bed. This is in one of the most important manuscripts of Donne's poetry. It's called the Huntington manuscript, now in the Huntington Library in California. And interestingly, where this poem is written, so you've got the book, the manuscript like this, poems written like this, and in the gutter here, written this way. The scribe, or a scribe, because I don't think it's the same handwriting. I'm trying to remember. I'm almost positive it's not the same handwriting as all this. Has written, why may not a man write his own wedding song? Okay? A wedding song. We're not reading any of these, but there's a long word for that, and there were several of these written during the Renaissance. Epithalamion is the big word for wedding song. Edmund Spenser wrote one to his wife. I'm drawing a blank. Donne wrote I'm drawing another blank. At least one. I want to say Donne wrote 2 or 3. This is not one of them. I mean, one of them's titled Epithalamion 2. So it's a celebration of another person's marriage. Okay? Read this poem and you can understand why somebody might write in the side, why may not a man write his own wedding song? It's all about the husband and the wife on their wedding night. Undressing her, the whole 9 yards. Okay? Satire 3, which I've talked about, is the satire on religion. Okay? The one poem we have in Donne's own handwriting is on page 928, the verse letter to Sir Henry Wotton, in case you want to see what it is. So we're going to turn to, since we're not doing the sonnets, I couldn't find the handout and we're out of time, Good Friday, 1613, Riding Westward. Okay? On page 939. This is one of the few poems of Donne we can actually date, because it's dated at the top. Okay? Riding westward. That is, heading west, not east. And he's gonna do a lot with east and west. Let man's soul be a sphere. So here's the sphere. It's the soul. And he says, and then in this, the intelligence that moves, the intelligence that makes that sphere rotate, according to that Ptolemaic system, devotion is. Okay? Devotion. What's devotion? Love of God. That's what devotion is. All right? And as the other spheres, by being grown subject to foreign motions, lose their own, if we take this idea, so that we have all the other spheres, this one moves, this has an effect on this one, which has an effect on this one, all the way down, so that by the time you get down here, it's like this sphere has very little of its own motion. It's being influenced by all these others out here. And as the other spheres, by being grown subject to foreign motions, lose their own, in being by others hurried every day, scarce in a year their natural form obey. That is, they don't move according to their own nature. But bear in mind, he said, let man's soul be a sphere. He's not talking about the cosmological spheres. He's talking about other men's souls. As they're affected by what? His soul is affected by her soul, which is affected by her soul, and her, because they all come into contact. So, Scarce in a year, their natural form, their natural movement, the movement they should have from birth, their primary cause, obey. Colon. What's the colon mean? And not all the manuscripts have colons here. Some of them have periods. Okay? It means what comes after are the things that are moving these spheres. Okay, bear in mind, what day is this? It's Good Friday. Okay? Pleasure or business? So our souls admit for their first mover and are whirled by it. He's saying our souls aren't moved by devotion. They're moved by pleasure or what? Business. Pleasure. Hedonistic desire, if you want. Business can mean work. It can also mean, because this is where the word comes from, busyness. Okay? Have a lot to do. Overheard, one of you talking about papers coming up and things like that, right? It's into the semester, time gets compressed seemingly. It doesn't literally, but it sure as hell seems like it does. Pleasure, we admit these things for their first mover. That is, if this is the speaker's soul, and out here is the empyrean, which is supposedly where God dwells, and God is the first mover, no. Forget God, because these are the things that really move me. Hence therefore is it that I am carried towards the west this day, when my soul's form bends toward the east. My soul's form. What's he mean by soul's form? I need to keep that. I can get rid of this stuff. What is a form of something? Like, for example, this. Did somebody hand make this bottle? No. It was produced in a factory. There is a form that the plastic pours into. Okay? And every bottle is identical. All right? So he's saying my soul's form, the thing that my soul really conforms to, the shape of my soul, so to speak, does what? It bends on this day towards the east. But he says, hence is it I'm carried towards the west. The body is heading westward. The soul leans towards the east. Think of the language of the compasses the other day in a valediction forbidding morning. Why does the soul's form bend toward the east? It's Good Friday. Where is the speaker? London. Where's Jerusalem to London? East. Okay. Why does the soul bend toward the east? Looking towards its form. Man, I cannot write today. To Christ on the cross. There, I should see a sun by rising, cross, set. And notice the pun on sun and sun. Some of the manuscripts do read, because I remember seeing it, do read S-O-N. So, there I should see a sun by rising, being raised upon the cross, set. And by that setting, the being crucified, endless day beget. Why endless day? Resurrection, heaven. Notice, all the language of in traditional Christianity, of the resurrection, heaven, all that, it's not what? It's not dark. There is no sun in heaven. Why? Because the sun, S-O-N, is the S-U-N of heaven. It's from the sun that all the light flows. So, and by that setting, endless day beget, but that Christ on this cross, some of the manuscripts read his cross, did rise and fall. By rising, he fell, died. Sin had, and notice the language, eternally benighted all. If he hadn't risen on the cross and died, then sin would have done what? It would have not given us an endless day, but an endless night. Hell for eternity. Okay? Yet dare I almost be glad. I do not see that spectacle of too much weight for me. Why does the speaker not see this is the spectacle? Christ hanging on the cross. He says, dare I almost be glad that I don't see this. Why doesn't he see it? Because he's riding westward. His eyes are this direction. Where's Christ hanging on the cross? This direction. His back is to that. It's a spectacle of too much weight. Okay? It would destroy, is the implication, if I were to see this. Who sees God's face that is self-life must die. That's in the book of Genesis. Moses says on Mount Sinai, let me see you. God says, no one can see my face and live. Hide yourself in that rock. I'll cover you with my hand. I'll go by you, and you can look at my backside when I go by you. That's the closest you're going to get. Okay? So, who sees God's face that is self-life must die. What a death were it then to see God die. So if it's death to see God's face, what a death would it be to see God's dead face? I mean, and we're almost, in one sense, we're almost back in the dream of the Rood, which I don't think Dunn knew at all. Okay? It made his own lieutenant, that is, God's death, made nature shrink. How so? What happened at the crucifixion? There's an earthquake. Okay? It made his footstool crack and the sun wink. The sun went dark for 3 hours. From the time of the crucifixion until from the time of being nailed on the cross until Christ died. Could I behold those hands which span the poles? So think of a cross. Here's a cross. Here's the bar. Here are the poles. Okay? But what else is he kind of alluding to? North-south poles. You know, this is called a span, thumb to little finger, and this is called a span. Michelangelo, Da Vinci had a drawing of a man, naked man like this, standing like this, and a circle all the way around. Okay? That had written underneath it, man, the measure of all things. But that's not what Dunn is alluding to here. Could I behold those hands which span the poles and tune all spheres at once? That's these spheres. He's talking about not just the poles of north-south, he's talking about the poles of the entire universe. Okay? Could I behold those hands nailed? Could I behold that endless height, which is zenith to us, the highest height, and to our antipodes, that which is the farthest down below us? That's what they referred to the southern hemisphere as, the antipodes, and the furthest southern pole was the farthest of that. Humbled below us. Notice the endless height. That's Christ. Could I see him humbled, that's buried? It could also be an allusion to the harrowing of hell. Christ going into hell, on the third day and such. Humbled below us, or that blood which is the seat of all our souls. Some of the manuscripts read state, the state of all our souls. That is the source of them. And that's also what seat means. Okay? Or that blood which is the seat of all our souls, if not of his, that is, not of his soul, made dirt of dust. So the blood dripping on the dust makes it into dirt. What's the difference between dirt and dust? Dirt has moisture. Dust is dry. We're told in one of the Gospels, I can't remember which one, Christ meets a blind guy. He spits into the dust. Okay? Makes it into dirt and anoints the blind guy's eyes. And the guy now sees. Made dirt of dust, or that flesh which was worn by God, like clothing, for his apparel. There's a psalm that talks about, he has put on his mighty apparel. That's typically read to be an allusion to Christ putting on human flesh. Okay? Or that flesh which was worn by God for his apparel, ragged and torn, right? Because when the nails are put in and the cross is dropped into the ground, not only do the shoulders dislocate, but that rips the wrists, Plus he had the crown of thorns, which wasn't taken off once he was put on the cross. So he's put on the cross, head pushed back, so now you got those thorns pushed into the back of the head, pretty ragged and such. If on these things I durst not dare, I durst not look, durst I upon his miserable mother cast mine eye. Keep in mind, the speaker's what? Riding westward. I don't have that up here. Good Friday, 16:13. Riding westward. Not looking towards the east. Okay? So, if I can't look at Christ hanging on the cross, could I maybe look at Mary? Because where's Mary? She's right here. Who's with her? There's 3 Marys, actually. And John the Baptist. John the theologian. Saint John, the beloved of Christ. So could I look at her, who was God's partner here, and furnished thus half of that sacrifice which ransomed us? Now, that kind of language for an Anglican priest, which he wasn't yet, this is 1613. He takes holy orders in 1615. That kind of language is getting real close to Renaissance Catholic thought. He's expressing high regard for Mary. Okay? Protestants, Dunn's age, Mary's just another woman. Could have been anybody. Okay? Essentially. So, though these things as I ride be from mine eye, because he's riding westward. And he's not talking about literally, like if he were to turn around, he'd all of a sudden be able to see Jerusalem 1,600 years previously. It's metaphor. They are present yet unto my memory. Why? He's familiar with the story. He's heard the story every Easter, every Passion Week, and every Good Friday. For that, the memory looks towards them. And thou, Christ, hanging on the cross, looks towards me. Okay, so when he brings up memory, he's probably referring to, stop it, an Ignatian exercise. St. Ignatius of Loyola, the guy that he puts down in hell in one of his books, okay? Ignatius came up with this spiritual exercise. In fact, they're called the spiritual exercises, okay? Where you imagine an event from Scripture. So you read about the event, crucifixion. Mentally, visually, you put yourself there at the event. Okay? You bury that image into, or not bury, you burn that image into your memory. Okay? So you think about it, you memorize it, and then you apply your will to what it means. All right? That's part of this meditative exercise. So that's what Dunn's referring to here. So these images, he says, they're present to my memory. As I'm riding away, I'm thinking about all this. It's Good Friday. The memory looks back towards them. And thou lookst. That's present tense. Thou lookst towards me. Where is he going? Pleasure or business? It's one of those two. That's why he's riding westward. He's off for pleasure or business. Meanwhile, Christ is hanging on the cross, looking at him. At what? His back. O Savior, as thou hangest upon the tree. Not as thou hanged. It's present tense. See, when you put that thing in your memory, you bring it forward to like it's happening right now. In the Orthodox Church, as an example, every Passion Week, every week from entrance into Jerusalem, Palm Sunday, from Palm Sunday to Easter, every Orthodox church talks about that as, okay, we're walking in real time. We are with Christ. Boom, right now. And there are services every day of the week. And all the events are relived, so to speak. Not acted out, there's not donkeys and cattle and such. It's kind of entering what's called mystical time. Okay? That's what Dunn's doing. That's what Ignatius was teaching there. As thou hangest upon the tree, I turn my back to thee, but to receive corrections. What does it mean? Why do you turn your back to receive corrections? How do you get corrections on your back? That's the lash. That's being whipped. Okay? Till thy mercies bid thee leave. That is, whip me, correct me, until you've achieved your goal. The goal isn't beating for pain. It's mercy. Oh, think me worth thine anger. Punish me. Now, if you wanted to, you could go back and read, like, batter my heart, three-person God, for you as yet, but knock, breathe, shine, and seek to mend. Sonnet 14. Notice how that begins. Batter my heart. Beat the living daylights out of it. Why? Because as right now, God, you're just getting to go, hello, is anybody there? Can I come in? I want to be inside. No. Think me worth thine anger. Punish me. Burn off my rust. That is, purify me. In my deformity. Restore thine image. What's the image? In the image of God made he them, male and female. It's the image, going back to the book of Genesis. Restore thine image so much by thy grace. Okay? That thou mayst know me. Know how. What St. Paul says, face to face. And then look at what the speaker says. Only when all this is done, I'll turn my face. Why? Because the speaker is saying, I can't do anything until God does this first. That's a Protestant idea. That's a fully Protestant idea. Okay? And we don't have time for it. And I don't have it on the syllabus. I used to do it all the time. Look at the little poem that comes right after it. A Hymn to God the Father. That was a poem Donne wrote when he thought he was dying. In that he had essentially something like the plague in 1623, which we're going to talk about, the devotions upon emergent occasions. We're going to read Meditation 17. He wrote these devotions when he literally thought he was dying. Okay? Well, he wrote that song, that hymn, also. And when he got better, he had it set to music and would have it sung at St. Paul's Cathedral. Okay? Devotion 17, or Meditation 17. "23 stations, each consisting of a meditation, an expostulation, and a concluding prayer. Stations, stationes, refer to the stations on the Via Dolorosa. I mean, they metaphorically do, kind of. The Via Dolorosa, the way of sorrow. It's a Catholic thing about, in Jerusalem, etc. You make your way following the path Christ took to Golgotha. And there are prayers, meditations at these points along the way. So this is Meditation 17. And it begins with this Latin phrase, Nunc lento sonatu dicunt morieris. Now this bell tolling softly for another says to me, thou must die. And you have to understand what the tolling bell means. And that's what all of this stuff is. In Scotland, the practice of tolling bells for when somebody died began in the 14th century. In England, it began in the 16th century. Henry VIII and Elizabeth I, they kind of wrote the rules for it. Right? And here's the rules. When a man dies, the death knell is tolled a total of 9 times. And that's 3 times 3 tolls. Now, the bell isn't the loud clanging bell. They put a muffle on the clapper. So that it lowers the sound. Boom, boom. So you get 3, pause, 3, pause, 3 for when a man dies. When a woman dies, you get 6. So 2, pause, 2, pause, 2. All right? Then there's another pause, and the bell will ring 1 time for every year the person lived. So what you don't want to hear is 1, 2, 3, silence. because that means a 3-year-old died. What you want to hear is 80 rings, because that means somebody lived a nice, long, full life. And then they kicked the bucket. So, Dunn is lying in his bed, thinking he's dying. Perchance he for whom this bell tolls may be so ill as that he knows not it tolls for him. And perchance I may think myself so much better than I am, as that they who are about me and see my state may have caused it to toll for me. Notice, maybe the person for whom the bell is now tolling, because it also tolls as someone is getting ready to die. It doesn't do these. But they put the muffler on and they just start tolling. And because there are no pauses, they know somebody hasn't died, but they know somebody's on death's door. That's kind of an oral indication for people in the neighborhood who would kind of know, John is really sick. He's getting ready to die. And they start hearing that bell, time to come. Come pay your last respects. Okay? So, the person, he says, perchance, for whom this bell tolls, is so ill, he doesn't know it's tolling for him. Like, maybe he's unconscious at this point. But then Dunn says, and maybe I think I'm so much better than I am, that I don't realize the people who are around me, they sent word to the church, start the bell. He's about to die. Maybe it really is for me. And I know not that. The church is Catholic, universal. Universal means Catholic. Catholic means universal. Okay? The church is for all Christians. And so are all her actions. All that she does belongs to all. What does he mean? He means all the sacraments of the church are for all Christians. When there is a baptism, a child is baptized into the body of Christ. That affects all Christians. When somebody dies, that affects all Christians. And he says, when she baptizes a child, that action concerns me, for that child is thereby connected to the body which is my head too, etc. When she buries a man, that action concerns me. All mankind is of one author and is one volume. Dunn loves the image of books in libraries as referring to people. When one man dies, one chapter is not torn out of the book. No, but translated into a better language. English, not a bad language, but he says, when one person dies, let's say me, and this is the book of all of our lives, when I die, my version gets translated from whatever it's written in to a pure language. And every chapter must be so translated. God employs several translators. Notice the imagery. Notice the metaphysical conceit. Translators are what? Death. But what forms do the translators take? Some are translated by age, some by sickness, some by war, some by justice. It's almost like Hrothgar's speech in Beowulf. But God's hand is in every translation. In other words, not a person dies that God's hand isn't involved. And his hand shall bind up all our scattered leaves. See, this is a leaf. It has two sides. This is a leaf. It has two sides. He's saying it's like we go into a room and there's paper scattered all over. And God will gather all those up for that library where every book shall lie open to one another. What does that mean? Right now, down here, we're what? closed books. Read, don't have time for this. Read Nathaniel Hawthorne's Minister's Black Veil, where he talks about, where the narrator suggests, we all have these deep secrets, and we're all walking, I don't have one with me, we're all walking around with black veils on our face. But we long for the day when we will all be veilless. Okay? As therefore the bell that rings to a sermon calls not upon the preacher only. Again, this is British custom. Little parish church, they ring the bell a few minutes before so that people in the village know church is getting ready, time to come. But it also calls the congregation to come. So this bell does what? It calls us all. Not to come pay our last respects. No, it calls us for something else. But how much more me, who am brought so near the door by this sickness? It causes me, or calls me, to do what? To think of my own death. And he goes into a story about there was a suit in times past between religious orders who should ring the prayers first in the morning. And it was determined they should ring first who got up first. First one to the church should be the one to ring the bells. If we understand aright the dignity of this bell, meaning what this bell means, that tolls for our evening prayer. Notice, it's not the death bell. This is the bell that's tolling for evening prayer. We would be glad to make it ours by rising early. That is, to get up, to not be late. In that application, and now he switches gears. He goes back to the original tolling of the bell. In that application, that it might be ours as well as his, whose indeed it is. So, if we would get up early to make it in time for evening vespers, likewise, when we hear the death knell tolling, we should get up early so that that bell calls us. So that we metaphorically die. The bell doth toll for him that thinks it doth. If you think the bell is tolling your death, then it is tolling your death. What does that mean? It's kind of like Albus Dumbledore telling Harry at the end of the first Harry Potter novel, to the well-organized mind, death is but the next great adventure. The well-organized mind is not afraid of death. It's like Hamlet telling his friend Horatio, just before in Act 5, he gets ready to have his duel contest with Laertes. The readiness is all. If it come not now, it will come later. If it come not later, it will come now. The readiness is all. He's talking about death. The speaker goes on. And though it intermit again, that is pause, though it pauses, yet from that minute that occasion wrought upon him, he is united to God. Though it intermit, though the bell stops ringing and the individual does not die, what? It's connected him to God. So that mentally, spiritually, he's prepared. Who casts not up his eye to the sun when it rises? But who takes off his eye from a comet when that breaks out? Who bends not his ear to any bell, which upon any occasion rings? I ought to do this one time when I'm teaching this. I'd ask one of you to, set an alarm on your phone so that about when I reach this point, an alarm goes off. Because every person's eye will turn towards that sound. That's what he's talking about.